few years after World War II. And during that time, Jewish people were very sensitive in processing what had happened to the Jews in Europe under Nazi Germany, where 6 million Jews were exterminated, put in concentration camps, and literally Hitler's mission was to wipe the Jews off the face of the earth. So the war ended in 45. In addition to that, a number of Jews from Europe go to Israel. And one of the reasons they went to Israel was because they felt that they needed a safe place to be. And so when I was so this is the time that I grew up in. So there was a strong push with Jewish identity during that time. Also, if you think about it, my family from Europe first went to Pittsburgh in 1895. And then Bobby and Zadie, your great-grandparents, came over from Lithuania, Russia, around in the early 1900s. And so many of these people had all the characteristics, and they brought the Orthodoxy religion with them to America. And they had 7 kids. And so I grew up also then from age 5 to age 18, except for about 3 years in the city of Pittsburgh. I lived in a neighborhood where the Tree of Life shootings took place, Squirrel Hill. And what was interesting about Squirrel Hill was well over 50% of the people in this community were Jewish. I went to a high school that was more than 50% Jewish, and a good number of the businesses, because Squirrel Hill had a thriving commercial area of businesses on Forbes Street and Murray that stretched for a mile one way and the business district and a couple miles the other way. And a lot of these businesses were owned by Jewish people. So that was the atmosphere that I grew up in. And all a part of that was, although there was then that strong ethnic identity, within the Jewish community, there was people who were Orthodox, there was people who were conservative practices, and there were people who were Reformed at all different levels, but in a sense, you all felt Jewish. So that was the atmosphere. So you were really kind of, during that period of time, it's like groups kind of tended to be with those who they felt comfortable with, who looked like them, acted like them, and shared certain customs, and culture. So that was the era. Things obviously, have changed, but that was how a lot of my early upbringing was shaped. So
you were raised in a culture that relatively stuck together because as you said before I started recording, Hitler wanted to wipe the Jews off the face of the planet. So that's sort of a fear, that frequency of fear being put into a people, no matter if you're in Europe or in America, it's an energy to cling together, for solidarity, right?
Yeah.
Like, what do you think? So as a result of that and being raised in that way, how did you really get this perspective of this hat that I have on, which is so freaking cool, love it, thank you, is from the Negro League, the Grays, right? And
there was, in Pittsburgh, there was 2 teams. There was the Homestead Grays, and then there was the Pittsburgh Crawfords. And there's a book out that I read called Smoketown. The author used to work at CNN, and he is biracial. And he's not from Pittsburgh, but he used to visit Pittsburgh because his grandmother was there. And I found the book profoundly interesting because it was basically a history of African American people in Pittsburgh from the late 1800s up to through the 1950s. There are things that are in this book, and most of it, as growing up in Pittsburgh, whether a Jewish person who has white skin, that you were not aware of, and in the schools you were not taught. So, growing up in Pittsburgh, there was all the racial stereotypes, and it did not highlight or give any justice to that Pittsburgh at the time, outside of Harlem, was considered a renaissance for Black people, but that there was so much negativity surrounding the Black community. There wasn't a lot of the rich and diverse history. For example, my mother grew up in Pittsburgh near downtown, an area called the Hill District. And that's where primarily the Jews who were low income lived. And they had their own organizations, settlements to take care of the people, whether it's food, housing, clothing, education, the whole bit. And as time went on, they began to move to other neighborhoods. But then what happened was Black people moved in to the Hill District, which today still is one of the primarily African-American neighborhoods in Pittsburgh. But even though Jews at times faced a vitriol of anti-Semitism, they had the opportunity to move into other areas within the city.
Because they were white.
Yeah, because they were white, better housing, more opportunities, and better education. If you were Black, forget it. This is where there was two primary areas in Pittsburgh, Homewood and the Hill District. And it's still that way today, although things have changed somewhat. So
well, how did you get so interested in Black culture? I mean, and I guess being open to people outside of yourself, outside of your race.
Here's what you'll find interesting is, well, I can't say in where I grew up, there was, like you might go in other communities in Pittsburgh, where there was out and out hostility towards Black people and other people of color, where people were pretty aggressive about it and using racially inflammatory words. In the Jewish community, racism was a little more subtle.
Racism towards other people, or racism
towards other people was a little more subtle. It was not aggressive. Jews have a long history, or some members of the Jewish community, in supporting civil rights and causes of Black folks. So and there were areas where they collaborated on different things, but in Squirrel Hill, among many Jews, instead of using the N-word, they would refer to Black people as Schwarzes. That's German for Black, or Yiddish. And it's kind of, when Jews use that, it's kind of said in a derogatory way. So, but I'm getting off track what you asked me. So you want to know, so here was the thing, and if you go back in time to the 50s, a lot of the establishment and white people were very concerned about rock and roll music, because they saw that white kids liked music that was, they looked at it as white kids were being corrupted, as far as the way of dances. And so a lot of white kids, their first introduction to Black culture was through music. In Pittsburgh, there was a radio station that played like rhythm and blues, which rock and roll came from. It was called WAMO, WAMO.
Oh, I know WAMO. You've talked about that for years.
Yeah, so yeah, WAMO. So a lot of white kids started listening to WAMO. And I think then they became interested in terms of, black music. And if you're also listening to the radio station, you're beginning also to hear different commentaries on stuff.
And so
again,
you knew, I mean, so they're making commentary about how black people, so, this is what, the 60s, by the time you were probably listening to that, or, like late 60s going into.
But because of, in one part, because of this radio station, you began to then, what concerned a lot of white people was that you began to look up to people of color or black people because of what they have to offer in regards to music. I mean, that was just.
And it was different.
And it was
opening up a world of people that you were not, it wasn't, people weren't promoting to hang out with people unlike them. People stuck together. But like, how did you even know? I guess the question I have for you is like, how did you get from like being this white Jewish kid who experienced your own oppression in a way because there was anti-Semitism, whether overt or, under the table, and people said stuff, or, and going from there to really exploring other cultures, not just black culture, but like, you have these three mixed kids now, and it's like, how did we even get there? Everybody, we will talk more to my dad. And then when I release this podcast in a few weeks, or maybe next week, you'll get to hear more of the story. But we are here to really uncover and elevate the fact that we are all one, and we are all beautiful, and we are all different. And that's really interesting. And it should not be a point of contention or fear. It should be a point to walk into the light and explore the power of the other. So stay tuned for more Black Jew with me, my dad, Jay Boatwright Simon, Jay Simon, and then my brothers will hop on if we can ever get them scheduled, because this, I think, is going to be really cool. So love to all of you. Freedom, power to the people. Namaste. Okay.
Are we still going on?
Yeah, we're still going on, but I just was doing, like, I was recording live on Instagram that whole time.
Okay, so here's what's significant. So all right, so you're introduced to music. Again, keep in mind, I was born in 1949. In 1957, black people started protesting in the South that they weren't able to vote. They had segregated restaurants, bathrooms, lack of jobs. Martin Luther King began to mobilize folks and white people joined that struggle. And in addition to that, what we saw, especially in the South, was the police unleashed brutal tactics as far as beatings, using hoses, dogs. And these things were outrageous to a number of white people living in other parts of the country. Seeing this happen. Are we stuck? Are you on this? I don't hear you.
Okay, we're here. We're here now.
Did you hear all what I just said?
I heard the part about the dogs and all that, but then you froze. So
okay, all right. So
let's go back to that.
Okay, so basically, like I said, when I was about 8 years old, you began to see through the power of television, black people being brutalized because they wanted what anybody else wanted, to be treated equally and fairly and having access to quality of life, to be admitted to a restaurant, to to be able to use, to go to school, to get a quality education, to be able to vote. And the white power structure reacted in a very brutal manner. And I think for a number of white people, this was
why do you think, why was it so threatening? You know, like why, I mean, we're talking systemic, so it's real deep, but it's like, why was it so threatening that people wanted the same thing that other people wanted? You know, like, it's so weird to me.
The original Constitution wrote, if you were a slave, you were 3/5 of a man. So the whole problem, the whole thing of slavery was to make black people the inferior, that you were less than human. So many people grew up with that thought and ingrained.
It was ingrained.
Mindset.
Yeah.
Ingrained mindset. So therefore, you know, black people were looked upon as a threat. So
because it was written,
yeah,
it was written in the law, and it was pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed. And so it's like any news that you tune into, you start to believe it.
So I was sensitive to that in the late 50s, because with the surroundings I had within my family and extended family, there wasn't really any overt backlash as far as